which means these playoffs are about to go crazy. The bracket is set, and the games tip off Sunday on ESPN and ABC. So what better time to bring in the voice of the W on ESPN and ABC, our friend Ryan Ruocco. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day, Ryan.
Oh, you got it, Malika. I'm pumped this weekend. I know you are as well, so it's good to be here.
I am stoked. And what do you say we start where you are with the Liberties? Stewie, Sabrina, and company, they're the heavy favorites, right, over the 8th-seeded Dream, despite Atlanta actually knocking off New York last night to claim that final playoff spot. Ryan, Atlanta is tied, actually, for the lowest winning percentage of any team ever to make the W playoffs. Do they have any shot here of pulling off the upset?
I mean, it's really hard to paint a picture where Atlanta can beat New York in this series. You know, the Dream barely eked into the playoffs and were able to get in against, two teams that were incentivized to not make the playoffs in Washington and Chicago. So I think it's hard to construct a case. The one thing you would say is Ryan Howard last year in the playoffs had an unbelievable 36.83 performance. She's that dynamic. She's the kind of scorer who can at least make you sweat in a game. Tina Charles, one of the all-time great scorers as well. So there is some firepower there. They've been better defensively when Jordan Canada has been healthy, which she is now. But it's hard to construct an argument. I think for the Liberty, your concern would be Sabrina Ionescu and the way she's played since the Olympics, which more or less coincided with when she dealt with a neck injury. You look at her shooting percentages, they've dropped off significantly. And if you narrow it even more to her last 11 games, which were post-neck injury, you go to like 31% from the floor and the 25% from three holds. And she, at the beginning of the year, the way we saw that floater miss, but that part of her game, developing that, her pick and roll chemistry with Jonquel Jones, the way she was facilitating more, her quicker first step and her quicker movements laterally, her play was really my biggest pillar of confidence for the Liberty this season. So I just think for them, they need her to play like she did for the first 80% of the season, 75% of the season, because her being at her best is really key. They may get by Atlanta regardless, but for them to win a title, they need Sabrina to be the Sabrina we saw, which was an MVP candidate for the first 3 quarters of the season.
Right, for them to really be able to capitalize on being the betting favorites to win it all. Someone who is hoping to have a little say about that, the Aces, they're going to start their quest for a three-peat in the 4-5 matchup with the Storm, right? So Las Vegas took 3 out of 4 games against Seattle in the regular season. It's the 3rd time these two teams have met in the playoffs, each one of the 2 occasions prior. By the way, the winner went on to win the WNBA title. So, Ryan, we know the historic numbers, right, that Asia put up this year, but I'm sure it's the historic three-peat now that she's after. So what are you looking to see from Vegas in this series?
I think you just want to see them look like a confident team, because what I saw at the end of the year was I saw a group that was realizing they were about to play their best basketball. It's something Becky Hammond talked about with Rebecca, Holly, and I a couple weeks ago when we did the Liberty Aces game. She said, you could look at our season and you could say, ooh, we've just never really hit that peak and it's just not coming. Or you can look at it and say, you know what? It's pretty exciting because I think it's about to come. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is that basketball is here. Now, they may not be as cleaned up defensively as we've seen in years past, but this is a group that has proven, obviously, they can win when it matters most. And one of their key ingredients is Chelsea Gray being at her best. She came off an injury and a re-injury at the beginning of the season, did not look anywhere near herself for much of this year. Over the last few weeks, she has looked much more like herself. Maybe not full bloom, but good enough to put the fear of God in opponents, especially when it comes clutch time. Saw her hit a huge shot against Connecticut a couple of weeks ago. Saw her have a big performance against Indiana. Chelsea Gray a couple years ago had maybe the greatest playoffs of any player in this league's history. If she is looking even 90% of herself, you can easily make an argument that Vegas is every bit the favorites that New York or Minnesota is.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is I was having a conversation with Becky when she was out here after the Aces lost to Los Angeles on a trip in the middle of the season. And she just said, I'm not quite sure whether or not this team is a little bit complacent after you win 2 titles. We're not going to know until we get a little bit closer to the playoffs and that want starts to be there more. And it feels like now we're seeing exactly what she was talking about just a couple of months back. I do want to hit, Ryan, if we could, Caitlin Clark in Indiana taking on the Sun, right? The Sun, they are the favorites, but odds makers give the Fever the best shot of any underdog to pull off an upset in the first round, despite having only 19 games of combined playoff experience on their roster. So you're actually going to be on the call for this one, right, Ryan? That's Sunday on ABC. And in a year that Caitlin Clark, I mean, sky-high expectations, and somehow she still shattered them. What are you expecting to see from the presumptive Rookie of the Year here?
I think we'll see her rise to the moment like she usually does. You know, I think one of the things that helps her is she has seen every kind of defense you could possibly see throughout the course of this season. A lot of times you go into a playoff series and you say, hey, this team's going to be able to be more lasered in. They're going to be matchup oriented. They're going to have time to prepare. And that's going to provide problems. And it's definitely going to provide challenges for Caitlin and for Indiana, because it is different than when you're in the sloth of the regular season and a team's playing 4 games in 6 days, whatever it might be. However, she so benefits, and her team benefits, from the fact that they got that defensive attention all season long. She knows how to handle it. And I think you're going to see something much different than what we saw when Caitlin started her career in Connecticut at the beginning of this regular season. Now, having said that, even though I think it's easy to say at this point she's already the best guard in the league, she and Indiana are going up against a Connecticut team that has unbelievable playoff experience and playoff success. And it's hard to not see some of those tight moments and think about the way Indiana snipes at the refs, looks a little flustered, can look a little inexperienced, and not think that in tight games that could be an area that Connecticut could take advantage of. They play every team tough in the playoffs. It doesn't matter who, whether it's Vegas, the Liberty, Connecticut always plays you tough. I think you have to give them a little edge in the series because of that and the experience, but I think Caitlin plays well, and so does Indiana.
Well, and our very own Shanae Gumake has said on the show, when you're looking for maybe some dark horses to keep an eye on in this postseason, Connecticut is one, and the Minnesota Lynx are another. And it's fitting, Ryan, that this one could be last up, right, in what could potentially be the final playoff series for Diana Taurasi. The Mercury will face a tough task of taking on Nafisa Collier and the Lynx. Minnesota beat Phoenix 3 times this season, with all of those victories coming by double digits. So this Lynx team was a winning machine during the regular season, Ryan. Do you see them slowing down anytime soon?
I don't. I mean, I don't. I think they look really good. They all can shoot. I mean, they have 5 players on the floor at every moment who can hit from 3. They have, 3 players who shoot in the mid-40s from 3. They share the basketball. They defend at a high level across the board. And they're coached by, maybe the greatest coach in this league's history in Cheryl Reeve. And Minnesota, they know championship basketball in that city. The atmosphere is electric. Phoenix also is kind of limping into these playoffs. So it's hard to craft an argument where you could say Minnesota drops this series. Minnesota, the Liberty are the favorite. They've had the best regular season. But the team that's been the best team in the WNBA over the last, month is the Minnesota Lynx. And that's why I think when you look at the way Asia Wilson's playing better than any player in league history, and Vegas and their championship experience, New York, how close they got last year in their regular season, and then Minnesota and how hot they've been for a long period of time now, how good they've been when Nafisa Collier's been on the floor. I think you have 3 really strong championship contenders there in those 3 teams.
Nafisa Collier was on our show just a couple of days ago, and she said, you know what, we feel good about that we're creeping up on some folks. Don't pay attention to us. Don't look at us too much. We are good just where we are. I do, though, want to hit the Mercury side of all of this, because last night's game, it was billed as if this is it for DT, if this is it, but we did see a tribute video. We saw a speech at center court following the game. So all of that makes you wonder if last night really was Diana's last regular season game. How would you describe her impact on the WNBA?
I mean, she's incredible, Malika. She's truly incredible. And I think, one of the things our mutual friend Sue Bird always says, and Diana's best friend, is if you talk to a lot of today's generation of WNBA players, they will say Diana Taurasi was my favorite player, is my favorite player growing up. If you look at her game, the way she shoots off the dribble, the way she's won, this is a player that's 16-2 all time in winner-take-all games. That's such a ridiculous record. You think about her college championships, yes, her sophomore year, their team was loaded. Go back and look at the roster she won with junior and senior year. She was an unbelievable force. I love the Gino Auriemma quote. Sometimes it's just about, we have Diana Taurasi and you don't. And a lot of times that's all that matters. And I also think this, Malika, she plays with a flair and that it always drew people in. But I wonder if she had come along today, if it would have drawn people in even more. My only wish is that both she and Candace had announced their retirements before they were playing their final seasons, so we could have properly celebrated both of them. Because when you talk about the GOAT in this league's history, those are really the two names. It's Candace Parker, it's Diana Taurasi, and they both deserve a lengthy celebration. So I hope whenever Diana plays her final game here in these playoffs, whatever arena it's in, she gets the acknowledgement she deserves, because we would not have the fertile ground we have for Caitlin Clark and everybody else to capitalize on the WNBA today if it wasn't for Diana Taurasi and what she did for this league.
That is so incredibly well put. I think nowadays Mamba mentality is evoked oftentimes, maybe a little too much. It's maybe used a little bit willy-nilly. But Diana Taurasi certainly and wholly, as Ramona Shelburne said earlier, embodies that. She is an absolute killer on the court and one of the kindest and funniest people you will meet off of it. I'm so very thrilled for her wife, for her daughter, and her entire family, if this is it. A huge round of applause for DT, because it's been a privilege to watch her play. Ryan, you're about to be incredibly busy. Thank you so much.
Draymond Green's comments overlooked in latest Warriors trade proposal. After their pursuit of LeBron James during the midseason trade deadline in February, there remains a possibility that the Golden State Warriors could make another run if the Los Angeles Lakers stumble out of the gate next season. In fact, the buzz surrounding James potentially joining what has been one of his biggest rivals has only intensified this offseason, following his and Stephen Curry's standout performances for Team USA at the recent Paris Olympics. The excitement of seeing James and Curry as NBA teammates has refused to die down. Current and former players have voiced interest in making it happen, and major outlets like ESPN have even sketched out a 2-year plan for the legendary duo to unite on the same team. This has led to a new trade proposal, with Grant Hughes of Bleacher Report recently suggesting the Warriors could send Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Kevin Looney, and essentially 3 first-round picks in exchange for the 39-year-old superstar. Draymond Green's previous comments on a LeBron James trade are being ignored. The biggest flaw in this proposal is that it completely disregards what Golden State forward Draymond Green has previously said about the possibility of trading for James. Green, who has built a close relationship with James, was reportedly one of the key figures pushing for the trade in February, even going so far as to send messages to their mutual agent, Rich Paul, in an effort to convince James to make the move. However, the veteran forward made it clear that if the trade involved Golden State's prized young talent Jonathan Kuminga, he wouldn't be on board. When I spoke to Joe Lacob on the phone and we were discussing what we'd have to give up, I said if it's Kuminga, the answer is no, Green said during All-Star Weekend in February. If Green wasn't willing to part with Kuminga for James then, why would the Warriors front office be any more eager now? If anything, you'd expect Green to be more open to the trade than the decision-makers. What could have changed between now and then? Is Golden State really more desperate after this offseason? Could Kuminga's contract situation now play a bigger role in potentially including him in a trade for James? Regardless, it seems Green's comments have either been forgotten or ignored in this latest trade suggestion. Trading away so much for a 39-year-old James would be a massive overpayment for the Warriors, especially when considering that James could once again opt out of his contract and become an unrestricted free agent next offseason. Not to mention, James has a no-trade clause that gives him significant control over where he goes. This scenario not only assumes the Lakers would start the season poorly enough for James to even consider requesting a trade, but that the Warriors would be struggling to the point of desperation, leading them to overpay, as this proposal suggests.